And welcome to Monterey Peninsula College. I'm David Clemens, the coordinator of the MPC Great Books program. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank some people, Rosa Arroyo and Michelle Brock in the Humanities Division Office, the MPC English Department, the Humanities Division, the MPC Foundation, the Monterey County Herald, and the Monterey County Weekly for their help and support. Dr. Edmundson's talk tonight is made possible by a generous grant from the APGAR Foundation. According to their mission statement, the APGAR Foundation, quote, makes grants to undergraduate programs that increase knowledge of and exposure to aspects of Western and American culture that have been instrumental in creating and sustaining the United States and other liberal democracies. The Foundation wants college faculty and students to deepen their understanding and appreciation of Western and American traditions, institutions, and values. As an APGAR grant recipient, MPC joins colleges and universities such as Washington and Lee, Villanova, Penn State, UCLA, Emory, MIT, and the University of Virginia. I'm delighted to announce that last week the APGAR Foundation awarded our program a new grant for the upcoming year. Mark Edmundson is MPC's first visiting scholar. He was interested in spending 3 days lecturing and conducting seminars on love, rock and roll, and football. These three topics may sound discrete, but they may more accurately be described as three movements in a meditation that began last year at this time. Mark's 2011 talk on self and soul. In yesterday's seminar, Can Rock and Roll Save Your Life?, Mark pondered how the structure of music may calm the fear that life is incoherent. He noted that music lets us endure boredom and stress and tune our moods, but also may divert us from grappling with our own turbulence. Responding to a question about the internet, Mark suggested that, quote, you need to know what came before what prior to being immersed in the internet's radical simultaneity. Tonight, Mark will wrestle with another question: why does love have to be so sad? Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Edmundson.
Thank you, David. Great pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming out. And this is about why love has to be so sad. All right? Ready? Go. Why does love get to be so sad? The question's from a song famously performed by Eric Clapton, the guitar maestro, for whom love could apparently be a sad affair in life as well as in music. Layla, the song he's best known for, has him down on his knees begging for love from a woman who, the story goes, happened to be George Harrison's wife. Even rock stars get the blues. Even rock stars suffer in love. It's a universal condition, erotic suffering. It afflicts us all. Ah me, says Shakespeare's Lysander in Midsummer Night's Dream, for aught that I could ever read, could ever hear by tale or history, the course of true love never did run smooth. Why is this so? Assuming that it is. Why is the erotic life so often full of grief, sorrow, or at least radical disappointment when it is supposed to be, and of course on occasion it is, a world of joy? Is it in our stars? Is it in ourselves? Is it a social flaw? Might we, by creating a better culture, make erotic life a sphere of enduring joy? We know, or think we know, that love promises ongoing bliss. Yet it so often ends in sorrow. As high as we have mounted in delight, in our dejection do we sink as low, the poet says. Perhaps we should simply reduce our expectations. But many people now, young people in particular, are erotic idealists. They seek joy in love. They are people, dare one say, whose erotic lives have become their spiritual lives. They are romantics. Nietzsche said that romanticism was the spiritualization of sensuality. He saw it as an attempt to confer meaning and respectability on the pleasures and the needs of the flesh. But perhaps that is a bit too harsh. Let us stay with the more charitable formulation. A romantic is someone who aspires to make his or her erotic life into a spiritual life. What does it mean to say that a man or woman aspires to find a spiritual life in love? From early in history, human beings have found ways to lift themselves up above mere animal existence, or to believe that they were doing so. We have always known that we are compelled by nature to hoard and sleep and feed, as Tennyson's Ulysses says, but we, or at least some of us, have wanted more than that. We have wanted to make contact with God and to do His bidding, carry out His commandments, fulfill His prophecy. Or we have wanted to be heroes who defend our families and our countries the way that Hector defends Troy in Homer's Iliad. Some men and women have made knowledge their ideal. John Milton and Francis Bacon were determined to learn everything that was worth knowing before they died. The highest form of this mental hunger is the hunger not for knowledge per se, but for wisdom. It is the drive exemplified and perhaps fulfilled by Plato and Aristotle, Schopenhauer and Kant. For hundreds of years, men and women have based their spiritual lives in faith, in compassion, in courage, and in the quest to expand the mind until it makes contact with truth. They have lived for ideals. They've also understood that the pursuit of ideals is dangerous. The thinker must always be haunted by the myth of Faust, who sells his soul to Satan in return for knowledge and experience. The corrupt Faustian is the man or woman who cares nothing for compassion, nothing for family, nothing for country, nothing for God. The warrior aspires to be Homer's Hector, but he fears becoming Ajax or Odysseus, the ox-like brute, or the scheming warrior opportunist. The aspiring saint must always be on guard against devolving into the slave to his own will to power. In his essay on Gandhi, George Orwell says that all saints must be considered guilty until proven innocent. Then he proves Gandhi innocent. Almost. To turn love into meaning, to turn sex into meaning, is this truly possible? To turn the drive to procreation into something significant, something to live by, to make the sex life, the life of the appetites, into something like a religion or something like a warrior code. How is this to be done? Shakespeare, who seems to me rather skeptical about most human endeavors, actually reserves some affection for love. He treats it with irony, yes, but not with the derision that he generally treats the hunger, say, for glory or the drive for power. He is not well disposed to those urges at all. Any character who cherishes such hungers is like to suffer and suffer badly in his work. In As You Like It, Shakespeare, tongue partway in cheek, allows his characters to describe the early throes of love. What is it to be in love? Just before the wedding scene that culminates the play, there is a brief reflection on love by Sylvius, the love-racked shepherd. What is this thing? What is love as a human experience? It is to be all made of sighs and tears, one devotee says. But then Sylvius takes over. It is to be made all of fantasy, all made of passion and all made of wishes, all adoration, duty, and observance, all humbleness, patience, and impatience, all purity, all trial, all obedience. It's a form of intoxication, one might say. It's a madness, Plato says, and whether it is divine madness or not, we may still have to discover. What causes the condition that Sylvius and Shakespeare describe? Why is it that what is most rational in us can succumb so quickly to the experience of love and allow us to go reeling in confusion, which is sometimes pleasurable and sometimes not? Love is an inebriate. It makes you drunk. Sometimes it's blissfully, serenely intoxicated. Sometimes it's rumbling, stumbling, bubbling, drunk. The lover and the tippler have been staples of comedy since at least Aristophanes. It is not hard to see why. Defenses peel themselves away, and we're left with a core of obsession, a core of need. The lover is spinning and spun. The lover is grandly off balance, so gloriously and momentarily on. But what is this intoxicating feeling? From one vantage, it is the feeling of being possessed by powers larger than yourself. You have been pleasurably taken over. Your will is not your will, and you have been drafted by the forces of nature to perform what can be a very pleasurable task. Your confusion is a kind of blissful vertigo. You no longer, to use Freud's idiom for a minute, have a superego. Nature has taken charge of your will and aimed it where it most wants to go anyway, towards love, towards procreation. To be drunk is to lose a measure of conscience. To be in love is to lose a measure of conscience. You are now being told what to do by a very powerful force that has you in its hands and is deploying you as it wishes. People like to give over their wills, or some of them do. I dare say that people who are prone to fall in love often are also people who are readily hypnotized, who get giddy on a single glass of wine, and who love a good movie, not too demanding if you please. Drunks hand over their Drunks hand over their being to chance. Lovers hand over their being to nature. But what exactly is this thing called nature, and what does it have in mind when it gently and humorously wrests control from the lover? What does it mean for nature to take you in hand and get you to do its bidding? One answer to this question comes from Darwin, and it is implicitly stated in his masterwork, Origin of the Species. It is a brilliant theory, or so it seems to me, though it does involve the mildly humiliating step of seeing oneself as a pigeon among an enormous flock of pigeons, and of seeing nature as a grand pigeon fancier. Nature a pigeon fancier? What could that possibly mean? What Darwin is talking about is breeding. He's reaching for a way to describe how character traits get handed down through time. Why do the fittest survive? They survive because they mate more often and they mate with better suited individuals than the rest of the members of the species. They pass on their favorable traits to descending generations and the ill-favored do not. The offspring of the fittest survive. The offspring of the less fit dwindle and die. How does nature do this, according to Darwin? Nature acts the way a person who raises pigeons, a pigeon fancier, in Darwin's nice Brit parlance, does it. It puts together the best possible partners and it breeds them, or at least it tries to make them breed. The pigeon breeder matches those pigeons for wingspan, endurance, color, health, and coat, and so does nature on the grand scale, not only for pigeons, of course, but for all living things. But, and here's the crucial point, the pigeon fancier must be content with mere external observation. He can look at his pigeons. He can examine them with his truly expert eye. No one can see as much in a pigeon-directed glance as he can. But he cannot penetrate to a view of their internal organs. He cannot know which ones will have healthy heart and lungs and liver. He may be able to find signs of internal health on the outside, but he may not. He may be misled. Darwin's point is simple. Nature can see all the way through. There is nothing that nature cannot find when she looks at the individual being and sends him or her off to breed. Here is Darwin in a great passage from the Origin talking about man and nature as breeders. Man, says Darwin, can act only on external and visible characters. Nature cares nothing for appearances, except as they may be useful to a being. She can act on every internal organ, on every shade of constitutional difference, on the whole machinery of life. Man selects only for his own good. Nature only for that of the being which she tends. How fleeting are the wishes and efforts of man, how short his time, and consequently how poor will his products be compared to those accumulated by nature during whole geological periods. The pigeon in captivity breeds with the pigeon in front of him. The pigeon in nature goes out into the world and, with nature as his guide, finds the best pigeon with which to procreate. Nature inhabits him when it is time to breed. Nature, as it were, becomes his ears and his eyes and his senses, and it sends him in the direction of the best possible breeding opportunity. Darwin suggests that the animal in search of a mate is possessed by a certain sort of knowledge. The animal has biological second sight. He has nature to augment his powers of discernment because nature wants one thing and only one thing. It wants him to breed and create the best possible offspring. It wants the healthiest generations to follow from the present, and it arms the members of this generation with remarkable powers. It bribes the individual with the inducement of sexual pleasure in order to make this happen. He thinks that he is serving himself, his own pleasure, his own ends. But in reality, he is serving the ends of nature, which wants life as plentiful and resilient and robust as possible. From the Darwinian point of view, when the creature, man or beast, falls in love, he is possessed. He is intoxicated, wild, inspired, and he thinks that he is fulfilling his own destiny. He thinks that he is happy because he has found his soulmate. But what Darwin hints at is rather different. In this way of thinking, the individual is elated because he is conforming to his biological destiny in breeding or preparing to breed in the optimum way. He is doing what he should. He is paying his first debt to nature. His second debt he will pay soon enough. He is feeling the elation of fulfilling his destiny. His will is no longer his own or hers. No accident that in Renaissance England equated will with sexual desire. And that provides a sense of purpose and of comfort, a strange comfort, granted. Perhaps all the giddiness that the playwright describes in As You Like It comes from having handed over one's complicated life to greater power and submitting oneself to what is deepest in us and what controls the world, the force of nature. When the man finds his mate, he finds his biological destiny, and in this he exults. But whether this makes him happy in the long run, that is another question. Years before Darwin wrote, the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer anticipated much of what he would say about sex and desire and love. Schopenhauer directly took up the question, why are so many individuals miserable in love? And it did not take him long to find an answer. Sexual desire is at the core of our being, he says, sounding much like Darwin, though without Darwin's British propriety. As natural creatures, we have one fundamental task in life, and that is the task of reproduction. We are propelled to find the best possible mate to create the healthiest possible child. We are pushed, driven in the direction of an individual who can collaborate with us in doing so. And we are filled with happiness when we have found our object and been accepted. But, Schopenhauer says, nature does not care for our happiness at all. What nature cares about is the health of the next generation. And nature does not care much about the powers of nurture that a given couple might be able to generate between them. In the great nature-nurture debate, nature casts an unequivocal vote. It is for nature. It does not matter to nature that the child-to-be will live in a house full of books and hear Mozart while he is in the womb. It doesn't matter that there is already money set aside for private school and the tuition, even to an Ivy League university, will be absolutely no problem. No, all nature cares about is creating a bouncing, healthy, thriving little integer who will go on to produce more of the same. As Schopenhauer says, there is something quite peculiar to be found in the deep, unconscious seriousness with which two young people of opposite sex regard each other when they meet for the first time. The searching and the penetrating glance they cast at each other, the careful inspection all the features and parts of the respective person have to undergo. This scrutiny and examination is the meditation of the genius of the species concerning the individual as possible through these two and the combination of its qualities. The look, to repeat this splendid sentence, this scrutiny and examination is the meditation of the genius of the species concerning the individuals possessed through these two and the combination of its qualities. Pardon me, the individuals possible through these two and the combination of its qualities. Nature's lack of concern about what concerns us is rather dramatic, Schopenhauer says. In particular, nature has no concern whatever about the happiness of the two people who come together to create the best possible child. The child is the object, not the pleasure of the parents. The idea is to create a winning baby, not to live happily ever after. Nature cares about absolutely nothing else. Absolutely nothing about ever after. Why does love have to be so sad? Schopenhauer, with an assist from Darwin, has a ready answer. It is because nature brings people together regardless of their personalities, their wants and desires and dreams and hopes. Nature is not worried about whether the male and the female in question are compatible or they are not. Happiness is not part of nature's plan. Life is. So people wake up from the dream of love and they find themselves ill-matched. The common question that friends or lovers always ask, why is he in love with her? Why is she in love with him? They have absolutely nothing in common. Nature has an answer. To nature, what they have in common is the right combination of genetic material. Nature brings them together through the laws of attraction, her laws, and then, her work done, leaves the scene and allows the individuals involved to pick up the pieces. Love is an affair of the will, Schopenhauer says. It is a matter of transpersonal drives much stronger than we are. Nature moves us where we need to be. Coupling is by far the most pressing business on earth, and we throw ourselves into it with a constant fury of attention and passion. In love, we use our intellects instrumentally. That is, we use them to help us gain the favor of the beloved. The intellect creates the stratagems that make love into a version of war. With the mind, I plot and plan to secure what I want. But of course, in truth and love, there is no I. There is no individual. We plot and plan thinking that we are fulfilling our own desires, when in fact we are pursuing the desires of nature. And in love, the intellect does something else too. It plans and plots for us, yes, but it also deceives us. The intellect weaves a story about the beloved. It creates a narrative that justifies the love we feel. The intellect finds all of the beloved's better qualities and enhances them. The pretty girl becomes a rare beauty. the intelligent man of Montaigne when looked at through what are rightly called the eyes of love. Shakespeare, to get back to him, has a lot of fun with the mobility of our erotic esteem in Midsummer Night's Dream. Their characters, their eyes anointed by Puck with love's bomb, snap from despising to worshipping the girl or the boy who's ready to hand. We must justify ourselves to ourselves, and the mind which we think of as doing our bidding actually functions as an unfeed attorney, an advocate for nature which is never acting in our particular interests, but only in the interests of the species. The mind is what we use to overestimate the beloved object. The phrase is Freud, but the sentiment is surely Schopenhauer's. Why does love got to be so sad? Because love is blind and often leaves the scene once we have done its bidding. We awake from its spell to find ourselves matched with whomever the biological roulette wheel matches us with. Then we can get ourselves a divorce and proceed to another mismatch. Why do late-life marriages tend to work rather well? Perhaps because the procreative injunction has dwindled and we are left with the desire for friendship and affection based on understanding. Ask T.S. Eliot if you don't believe me. Love is not in love with us. What more is there to say? The intellect is overwhelmed by desire and disguises the true nature of the beloved so that we can get the work of nature done. Then we wake up. After the night or nights of inebriation, we have to face the cold dawn of the hangover, which is another name for married life after, as B.B. King canonically says, the thrill is gone. How can you be happy in love from Schopenhauer's harsh and rather Darwinian vantage? You can get lucky. You can wake up and find that besides being a splendid biological match, you're a human match to boot. You both like opera and need to keep the bedroom window open, even in the winter. The differences you downplayed during the drunken expanse called courtship weren't sharp enough to cut to the bone. And maybe, too, the lover got a chance to peek through the cloud of love that surrounds the beloved individual. Maybe she went into the game with just a touch of Schopenhauerian shrewdness. Maybe she'd read the world as will and idea cover to cover, as every human being should, but probably not. And then all there is to do is trust to luck and to the human powers of patience and tolerance. As Dr. Johnson says, about 1,000 times in 1,000 ways, life is much more frequently to be endured than it is to be enjoyed. And Johnson knew what he was talking about. He was married to a drunken older woman who needed luxury and indulgence. Teddy, her name was, and Dr. Johnson, by and large, indulged her. Is Schopenhauer's theory rather off-putting? He has an answer. However loudly those persons of a lofty and sentimental soul, especially those in love, may raise an outcry of the gross realism of my view, he says, they are nevertheless mistaken. For is not the precise determination of the individualities of the next generation a much higher and worthier aim than those exuberant feelings and immaterial soap bubbles of theirs? All worldly wise people know that the path to erotic satisfaction is not an easy one. Maybe it's non-existent. Love is a peril and all the rest. This was clear even to the writers and thinkers we call romantic. Yet to be a romantic is to be willing to take the ideal of love as being at the center of life. The romantic, broadly speaking, is willing to consider the idea that an erotic life can be a spiritual life, as we've said. With so broad a definition, Freud is in his way a romantic. Shelley and Blake are high romantics. The romantic wants love to be a spiritual life, but he will not rest content with what we might call spiritual love. He wants his love to be as physically intense as possible. He wants it to include all the passion that Darwin and Schopenhauer describe. But he wants more than that, too. Shelley famously defined love, Percy B. Shelley famously defined love as, quoting Shelley now, a going out of our own nature and an identification of ourselves with the beautiful, which exists in thought, action, or person not our own. The definition sounds abstract and a bit cold. It sounds as though Shelley's sense of love was Christian and monastic, as though he was hearkening back to the old days of the beloved Christian community as defined by St. Paul. Nothing could be less true. Shelley is a proponent of sexual love. Powerful erotic attraction and sexual consummation must be at the core of love for Shelley if it is going to qualify as authentic. The instincts must be engaged, the appetites must be awakened, and in time they must be satisfied. For Shelley, love is the primary thing in life. You see this in his first major poem, Prometheus Unbound. To unbind himself from his limitations, physical and metaphysical, Prometheus needs to perform two tasks. He has to repudiate the spirit of revenge, and he has to fully embrace his beloved, Asia. She is his soulmate. She is for him, and he for her, the being that Aristophanes described when he speaks in Plato's Symposium. To Aristophanes, or Plato's Aristophanes, there was a time when certain human beings lived in a condition of bliss. They were all and everything in themselves. They were complete. Though they were also, to be sure, rather grotesque. They had 8 limbs, a bit spider-like, I'm afraid, and were fused in the middle. They must have cartwheeled from place to place. But they were merry. So merry that they made the gods jealous. So the gods split these rolling unities apart and made them into two people. And from then on they roamed the world looking for the missing part of themselves that had surrendered, that had been sundered on that sad and sorry day. The soulmate, Shelley and Aristophanes believe, is the one that makes us complete. Without him, without her, we are only partial beings. We are all mind and no heart, all analysis and no imagination, all work and no play, the list goes on. But when we merge these qualities, we become whole, and accordingly we become free. We work and play at once, making our avocation our vocation, as Frost puts it. We think and feel at the same time, conquering what Eliot called the dissociation of sensibility. We play with full and productive seriousness, as Schiller said that we might, when we made ourselves one. We labor and know the fruits of our labors as being our own and not the property, in fact or in conception of another. Karl Marx is speaking indirectly here. Prometheus finds this sort of completion in his conjunction with Asia. Thinking of her, he cries out, Asia, who when my being overflowed wert like a golden chalice to bright wine, which else had sunk into the thirsty dust. That is, she gave him focus, aim, objective, form. It often seems against gender type that Asia is the more analytical of the pair. It is she who spends herself in shrewd, lawyer-like questioning of the poem's weird spirit of transformation, Demogorgon. It is she who seems to have more gift for metaphysics. Did Shelley believe in free love? That's what many people think. He surely wrote a ferocious polemic against marriage. With one shamed friend, perhaps a jealous foe, the dreariest and the longest journey we go, he says of that institution. He seems to endorse multiple loves. He says, true love in this differs from gold and clay, that to divide is not to take away. But no one should think of Shelley as an avatar of promiscuous abandon. He's not a prophet of hookup culture. To him, love is sacred, too sacred to be confined by mock sacraments such as churchly marriage, and too sacred to be diluted by promiscuity. Nothing should stand between a man or woman and the embrace of the soulmate. Sigmund Freud never read Percy B. Shelley, as far as I can tell. He may barely have heard of him. But Shelley embodies precisely the kind of error that Freud saw himself as devoted to refuting. Freud detested idealizations in all forms, or that is how he would have put it, an idealization being an error, that of placing more hope in a person or concept than it will bear. But to others, what Freud hated most was ideals. He devoted time to exploding the ideals that had come down to the West from the ancient world. He was an enemy of religion, an enemy of heroic aspirations, an enemy of speculative philosophy, trafficked too much in airy nothing. But those ideals had been attacked before. Voltaire did not live in vain. The new idealization, the great tempter and destroyer of the modern spirit, was nothing other than love. Romantic love. Freud believed that almost everyone who was psychologically impaired was an erotic idealist. A neurotic is someone who, by definition, expects too much out of love. No matter what their other difficulties, the patients that Freud saw almost all on some level believed that they were ill because they had been insufficiently loved, or that with love, now, in the present, they might be made whole. Freud scoffed at this hope. He called it the cure through love. But he also made use of it. Love became for Freud what we might call therapeutic bait. For the patient always falls in a certain sort of love with the analyst. The neurotic is someone who considers everyone who comes upon the scene as an erotic possibility. And when a figure of authority like the analyst doesn't resist, the neurotic is delighted to fall fast and furious in love. The therapist draws out the patient's love and then makes it the subject of the analysis. For the love that the patient has for the therapist echoes the love he has offered all of the other beloved figures in his life. Invariably, the patient's love is flawed. He asks for too much from the beloved. He hopes for too much from love itself. Freud demystifies the patient's elevated hopes for eros. One might even say that person by person, case by case, he attempts to demystify love itself. Romantic love. Freud refers to love as overestimation of the erotic object, a term and view that Schopenhauer would have endorsed. For Schopenhauer, we overestimate the erotic object because nature forces us to do so. The sex drive drags the intellect along with it, making the intelligence a justifying, arguing attorney for the choice, usually a poor one from the point of view of individual happiness. Freud, rather surprisingly, doesn't make much use of the biological argument to demystify love, though he tends to believe that we have no real idea who it is we're falling in love with. But this is because of the influence of the parents. To Freud, theorist of the Oedipal complex, We seek a lover who recalls the parent of the opposite sex with whom we fell in hopeless love as children. We seek resemblance to that primary imago, and when we find it, we are thrilled into erotic joy and confusion. But the person before us is not the parent whom we idealize. We think we have refound a primary object, but we are wrong. Freud spends much of his time saying whatever he can that's disparaging about love. It's overestimation of the object. It entails putting the beloved in place of the ego ideal. It is all too often a narcissistic plunge. We love ourselves in the person of the beloved. Or it is love based on propping or leaning. Freud calls this analytic love. A love based on the mother, and more precisely, the love for the mother's breast. Not all of these accounts are compatible with each other, and that's putting it charitably. Freud, one sometimes thinks, will say anything he can to denigrate romantic love. And why not? His middle-class contemporaries are not threatened by hunger or unemployment or social isolation. They have what they need on a basic level, and yet they are miserable. Why is this? Many reasons, but frequently they are miserable because they make themselves so. Love is one of the chief means that they use to do so. They want sublimity in love, but sublimity does not sort well with the rest of their lives, which is why they want it. Freud wants to tame their sense of what love can offer. He wants to bring their hopes in line with stable reality. He wants candid talk about sex, no more repression, but he imagines that the result of that candid talk will be a calmer, more stable, erotic world. Not sexual utopia, sexonia. No. Freud does not care for that sort of ideal at all. Philip Rieff, his great commentator, more Freudian than Freud, says so, and he is right. Freud takes a middle road. He wants the erotic instinct respected and acknowledged, but he also wants it to be contained and looked to only for modest satisfaction. He thinks that one of the highest of human achievements, especially for male, is to fuse the desiring current with the current of tenderness. From there comes a life of sexual contentment. Those who cannot do so are still too close to their mothers. They fear falling back into the abyss of the great womb. Mixing desire and tenderness to create contentment? Attractive? It depends on how many times one has been wounded and self-wounded in the wars of Eros. For Shelley, the idea of settling for such a modest dispensation is absurd. He wants to combine burning desire with admiration in order to create, well, let us see precisely what. Who is Shelley's Prometheus? Or to put the question in a better way, who is Prometheus once he is unchained and joined with Asia? When the two are fused together, Prometheus attains his full powers. He has been the one who made cities and seen the azure ocean flow between the white columns as they stand on the cliffs. He has created not only the works of poetry that matter, for as Shelley says, all true poems contribute to a giant poem, always in the making, but he has also made scientific discoveries to free men from pain and to prolong a joyful life. And this is Prometheus Unbound, a few lines. He, Prometheus, told the hidden powers of herbs and springs, and diseases drank and slept. Death grew like sleep. He taught the implicated orbits woven of the wide wandering stars, and how the sun changed his lair, and by what secret spell the pale moon is transformed when her broad eye gazes not on the interlunar sea. He taught to rule, as life directs the limbs, the tempest-winged chariots of the ocean, and the Celt knew the Indian. Cities then were built, and through their snow-like columns flowed the warm winds, and the azure ether shone, and the blue sea and the shadowy hills were seen. To the question, where does such creativity come from? Shelley answers that it comes from love, and from the unbinding of the imagination, from the constraints imposed by repressive cultures and by the mind's own timidity. Prometheus did wonderful things before Jupiter enslaved him, and it's clear that now, unbound, he's in a position to do more of them. Freud doubts all of this, of course. One might say that he came to us in order to destroy erotic idealizations, and as we have seen, there's a measure of truth in this. But what Freud came to destroy was the idea that erotica life alone could put an end to all of life's difficulties. Freud's patients, and many of the rest of us, are people who are naive about love. They think, we think, that once it's found, happiness ensues. It's possible then to relax into a lotus land of ease and ongoing pleasure. Blake, similar to Shelley in many ways, called this world Beulah, the place where all contradictions are true, all contraries are true. Aristophanes may be misleading. If you think that love will make you whole and pure and complete and outside of time, you're wrong. If you think that all you need is love, you've made a mistake. Freud thinks as much, and Shelley seems to, in a certain sense as well. The only love that matters to Shelley is love that feeds creation. He only respects love that leads to more work and works. If an attraction doesn't make the individual more creative, more humane, more generous, and more eager to redeem the world or a corner of it, then it is not love. When love ceases to inspire fresh creation, it is no longer love. Asia and Prometheus will fight Jupiter and his minions forever, and they will create. When they stop doing as much, they are no longer in love. Is it possible to be anything but a fool to Schopenhauer and Darwin's procreative nature? Can you ever see through the haze of obfuscation to the authentic beloved? Shelley's poem suggests that you can prove it on your pulse. If love makes you and your beloved more generously imaginative, then you have beaten the biological imperative, though you may be indulging biology too. If you thrive and make and do for others, not yourself, when you're in love, then it is love worthy of the name. If your love makes you kinder, more compassionate, more generous, then that is true love. If it makes you ready to sell something of what you have and give it to the poor, then the authenticity of your love is not easy to doubt. If love makes you braver, more ready to stand up and fight when fighting is what's needed and there's no way to get around it, then that, perhaps, is true love. If love makes you more thoughtful, and you take a step, no matter how shaky, in trying to answer the everlasting questions, then that, Shelley suggests to us, is true love. Freud says repeatedly that lovers create a world in which only two people exist. Yes, true. If what you have is double sublunary lover's love whose soul is sense, as Donne immortally put it, then yes, you've created a world of only two people. That's the definition of lazy love. It's analytic love, narcissistic love, Oedipal love, the love of one biological entity bent on improving the species for another. Though without that natural imperative, Shelley says, there is no true love. That's the sort of thing that Freud tried to debunk once and for all. But if love begets ode to the west wind, then it is something else again. If it makes you fight, as Shelley did from the time he was a boy, for political justice, then who is to say it is not true love? How rarely does this happen? Rarely. Though I persist in thinking that no effort, however shaky, is to be disregarded if it comes from a loving heart. Do not judge yourself by results, the Bhagavad Gita says, but by what you have aspired to do and how potently you have thrown yourself into the effort. Strongly spent, says Robert Frost, is synonymous with kept. The inheritors of unfulfilled renown, those who gave it what they had but never quite brought their works to the finish line, as Shelley calls them, matter too. And then, of course, even the most creative love sometimes fades, often with harsh effect on all involved, children included. And often the romantic lover moves away for the next inspiration, the next muse, be it female or male. Galway Kinnell, a very good poet, writes a poem on the matter in which he excoriates Shelley with a grim self-righteousness for being as destructive in his personal erotic life as he sometimes was. Point well made, point well taken. But then Kinnell never wrote anything like Ode to the West Wind or Prometheus Unbound. Chances are that he never will either. Thank you. I will be happy to answer questions, objections, fulminations, rages of various sorts, or anything else that comes my way. There is something hurtful about the Darwinian view of procreation. And I dare say that in the crude, large Darwinian sense, people who have something physically wrong with them tend to be less attractive for the purposes of procreation than others. They may be attractive as friends and confidants, and the love of a certain sort may grow up between them and other people. But if at the heart of love is the Darwinian desire for procreation, then it is less likely that it will arise where there are real physical difficulties. Now, it's possible that nature knows more than we do in this regard, and there are times when somebody who has a palpable physical difficulty, according in this Darwinian mode, will encounter somebody whose own genetic makeup will accommodate, overcome, overwhelm their problem, and they'll create a bouncing, happy child. We don't know this, but nature does, and nature says, you go over here. It doesn't look right, but this is where you belong. This is, from Schopenhauer, Darwin's point of view. And the individuals involved, they don't say yes, they don't say no, they just go over there, right? So I think, two things. There's a sense that physical infirmities are less attractive, but that nature may know how to work with them in ways that are not immediately available to us. We, as the pigeon fanciers from the outside, say, that's a pigeon with a broken wing, forget about it. Nature may say, yeah, but broken wing goes with, excessively strong wing, and we're going to get something really good out of that. And you just don't know it. So I think there are two answers to your question. And, we may trust nature on the second one. Does that make some sense in terms of what you're asking? I think you're always asking, what are the primary forces that impel human behavior, right? And I'm not sure I'm following exactly your line of thinking, but one thing that arises from it would be the idea that mating or conjunction has to do with financial advantages, right? Status advantages, right? And there's a literary critic named Kenneth Burke who is interested in kind of not just the attraction between people, but also the sense of ascendancy at the same time. And he makes very unpleasant puns on mounting, right? That is, sexual mounting with status mounting simultaneously, right? I think that, just in my observation, and in Schopenhauer's and Darwin's and Freud's, the money thing, the class thing, the status thing is a serious consideration, but it's secondary or tertiary to that biological oomph, right? Now, one of the ways society tries to deal with the biological oomph is as follows, it seems to me. There's a lot of danger in it. Because, to put it crudely, if your children are upper middle class, you really don't want them, some people, going off and conjoining with working class types, lower class types, what have you, right? There's a certain guardedness about all that. So what we do is we create places called colleges, right? And people of roughly the same socioeconomic group are poured into these colleges. And, Darwin or Schopenhauer, looking down from above, would say, a little bit of learning gets done here, but basically it's a mating pool, right? And there's a lot of social strictures, too, against, dating the janitor or dating the maintenance staff. But nonetheless, I think that those relationships or those pools are the primary ones. There's a line that I tell my students that my wife lives here particularly doesn't like. I can't remember what it is, that a college is like a tossed salad. You put in males, you put in females, you add alcohol and you toss it around, and you see what happens. And what happens is a certain kind of mating. And we hope, the parents hope that the people who have the Darwinian pull to each other, because there's not just one of them out there in the world, will come from the same socioeconomic group. So there's an attempt to isolate people within socioeconomic groups, but they break out all the time, right? And there come, bouncing happy babies who came out of the wrong social matrix, but bouncing they are. When Freud says, that love is about two people creating a world of their own, he's talking about the kind of narcissistic or enclosed love that he wants to denigrate, and that Shelley wants to denigrate too. He doesn't like that either, right? Prometheus and Asia matter as lovers because they go out and fight Jupiter and create great poetry and inspire scientific work. Shelley loves science, right? So then, with that point clarified, then you'd say that from this point of view, right, the human quest involves a biological quest, right? And from this point of view, and it involves a spiritual quest for people who are romantics, right? And these things, from this vantage, are so primary that something like a promiscuous relationship or an open relationship is the result of people who are still trying somehow to find these things and not quite owning up to this search, or who have become so angry and disillusioned about the experiences they've had that they no longer want to seek to fulfill either of these kinds of destinies? The desire for the finding of the soulmate, is great and overwhelming. And when you do find it or sense you have found it, and then there's a decision, there's a kind of spiritual decision, right? Either you live with it and you devolve into narcissistic love, or you do the Shelley thing and you start working with it, right? either way, either in the delusional state or in the productive, creative, Shelleyan state, there's one thing that scares you more than anything else, and that is that you'd lose the person you love, right? And so that is something that has to be explored. What would happen if, you know, this most beloved thing left my life? What happens then, right? And so it would become a kind of what-if situation. And more than a what-if situation, it would be like, shall I go down this? It's an exploration, because shall I go down this road, given that if I lose this person that I absolutely adore, I don't know if I could stand it. I don't know if I could stay alive. You know, it's hard to picture, you know, kind of Juliet whistling through life without Romeo, or Romeo without Juliet. So I think it's a measure, it's a human contemplation of how much is risked and what the terrors could be of the loss. You know, and it would be as though Prometheus said, Asia, wonderful, but if I ever lost her, I don't know what would happen. You know, I'm going off by myself to a monastery or something because I just couldn't bear that. And so I'm just rolling my wheels because these are such new and hard and interesting questions. And so Romeo and Juliet is an exploration of that and lets us know a little bit about how we feel about it. This is, again, a controversial area, and I mean no offense. From the point of view of a Schopenhauer or a Darwin, homosexual love, a homosexual is perhaps somebody who has not been selected by nature to be a breeder. And this gives people remarkable freedom and also perhaps a sense of loss. What is loved then that's a tough question. That's a tough question, you know? Is it only spiritual love? Because there's a carnal dimension to it, for sure. But the passion that is central, the procreative passion isn't there. And yet there's an intensity of love. So I can't actually explain that very well. And I would just dare to say two things. One, that anybody who can explain or account for the question of human homosexuality has made a major breakthrough in terms of understanding of human life. And secondly, that the discourse, the freedom of discourse on this subject has now been shut down to an extent that free speculation on it is extremely difficult. So I'd say those two things. But I would try to break through some of those barriers if I had a better idea. But it's always been an area of puzzlement, as you know, to me, and it's not something I fully understand. But the question would come then, where does the passion come from? Exactly. Now, somebody like Freud, who's very unpleasant on the subject of homosexuality, would say it comes from narcissism. Right? That's a narcissistic kind of love. But that's too reductive and doesn't really work for me. Right? That narcissism would replace the procreative passion, it's a little cruel. It's a little cruel. I think that nature doesn't know anything about contraception, right? And so, but humans do, and they intervene with culture. But that attraction still has the same basis, that biological basis. And we as humans can trick it and say, no, we're not going to indulge nature all the way. We're going to use contraception. But what pulls one person to another in an irrational, wild, and giddy way, Schopenhauer and Darwin still maintain, is that. You can outwit it all you want. Another way to outwit it is by having an arranged marriage, right? Then you outwit the crap out of biology. I don't know what it does, you know, in other spheres. So then I guess one asks, why are babies not healthy? Why are babies, how do babies turn out in the culture of arranged marriages? This logic would suggest not as well. I don't know if it's true or not, but sometimes the arrangers have the pigeon fancier's eye at least, if not nature's eye. These questions are of such complexity that there are going to be a lot of difficulties with any hypothesis, but it seems worth trotting out there to see what happens. I mean, the fundamental thing that Darwin wants to say, all through Origin, all through his work, is, here's how animals act. And then implicitly, don't you think people probably act the same way? What would separate us from them exactly? Well, culture, but how much say does culture have? Exactly. The contraceptives say, which is really interesting, but they still desire. And where does desire come from? What is the secret of desire? And why is desire so often contrary to one's ethics? You know, I want that. You're not supposed to want that. That's not who you are. Don't care. You know, that'll make you miserable. Don't care. Right? I mean, this is, you know, older people think, oh, well, I guess that's kind of interesting. Younger people, yeah, of course. Don't care. Don't care, don't care, don't care. Thank you. I learned a lot of stuff, and I appreciate your questions. I appreciate you listening through. Bye-bye.